All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, the online version of ourselves here. The archives and the library at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, as you may know, represent the single largest and most comprehensive collection of materials on Eastern European Jewish civilization in the world. You might wonder, what does that mean? How big is that? Well, I can give you a few figures and say that YIVO has about 24 million unique items in our archives and about 400,000 volumes in all European languages in our library. So as you can imagine, the possibilities for research are very endless, whether you are just an amateur scholar, whether you are a PhD student, whether you are a high school person, whether you are just anyone who has even a little bit of curiosity about Jewish history, about Jewish culture, about Eastern European life. There's a lot of things there. And a lot of it, at least more over time, is digitized. So we have today Hallel Yadin, who is an archivist at YIVO, and she's going to help us understand how to access some of YIVO's digitized holdings. We've had some previous events on this sort of topic where you can learn about archives in general and also about how to use YIVO's websites where you can figure out how to access all of our holdings, including the non-digitized things. But today we're going to focus mostly on the digitized holdings. So if you're curious about the non-digitized materials, you can check out the other programs about that. But today, if you are someone who has internet access anywhere in the world and you want to access some of YIVO's materials, you're in the right spot. Hallel, as I said, is an archivist at YIVO. Before coming to YIVO full-time, she interned in the YIVO Archives and also worked as a research assistant at Rutgers University's Special Collections University Archives. She received an MLIS with an emphasis in archival studies at the University of Missouri, and before that has a BA from history from Rutgers University. So we're so glad to have Hallel here again today. We really welcome all of your questions. So throughout the event, please add your questions in the Q&A, likely at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or if you're on YouTube, you can put that in the YouTube chat. We're glad to have you with us today, everyone, and go ahead.
Thanks, Jane. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Thank you all for being here today. Good morning or afternoon or whatever it is, wherever you are. This is the final, for now, program in our How to Do Research at YIVO series. Like Jane said, we've already had 2 workshops. What is an archive? Which, if you're new to archival research, I would strongly recommend checking out. And a practical introduction to research at YIVO, which was more in-depth information on what a catalog is and how to search it and how all of our catalogs interact with each other. So I would recommend checking those out. My colleagues are going to keep putting a PDF with all of the links that I talk about in the chat. So the links are there, they're on YIVO's YouTube page. So definitely, if this is your first or second program and you're interested in research, I'd recommend going through all of those. As Jane said, my name is Hallel. I'm an archivist and special projects manager here at YIVO, and what we're going to focus on today is a topic that I know everyone is interested in, and that's how to access digitized material. And just so you all have a sense of what I do, in the past few years, if you've emailed reference@yivo.org, if you've requested photographs of material, if you've called YIVO, if you've had a Zoom appointment, you have dealt with me, whether you knew it or not. So as ever, I said this in the first 2 workshops, these are really based on the questions and concerns and sort of troublesome areas that keep coming up. Like Jane said, we're going to do Q&A at the end. My colleagues will be keeping an eye on the Q&A function and on the chat, and we'll have plenty of time, so don't worry, and hopefully we will be able to get to everyone's questions. Before we get started, I do have a disclaimer that I know is kind of a bummer, but when we talk about accessing digital material, we're talking about a very small proportion of YIVO's collections. Most of our material is not digitized, just volume-wise. If you're looking at the number of pages, number of collections, anything like that, we're going to talk a lot about the digitization process and why not everything is digitized. But just so you know, this is not close to everything that we have. And we'll talk at the end about how to access non-digitized material remotely, which we do as much as we can. But just bear in mind, this is really helpful for doing research at home, and we are constantly adding new collections. But just bear in mind when you're doing research that just because we have a lot of stuff digitized does not mean we have everything digitized. So today, like I said, we'll talk about the digitization process and what that looks like. We're going to talk about Archivespace, which is the portal through which you can access most digitized material. We are going to talk about project websites. And by that, I mean websites for digitization projects that predate Archivespace, and that the material is not integrated into Archivespace. So if you want to access it, you'll have to go to these individual websites. And then, as promised, we will talk about how to get material digitally if the collection you're interested in has not been digitized yet by our digital lab. So, digitization at YIVO. We're going to talk a lot about the digital lab process. We have an in-house digital lab of 4 full-time team members, which is fairly rare for an institution of this size. So we have 4 people working full-time to digitize collections. But before it even gets to the digital lab, material, by which I mean, archival collections, has to be processed, which means it has to be put in order. It has to be described. So if you've seen any of our previous workshops and you've heard about the finding aid, or if you've come across finding aids in your research, that's the description, right? So an archivist puts it together, puts the materials in a particular order, writes down the contents of each folder, and material also has to be conserved before we can handle it to digitize it. So before we even really start the digitization process, we have a processing archivist and a conservator who has completed their work on the collection. YIVO has 3 camera setups. Here's a little picture of one. These are very good high-res cameras. If you've ever seen any of our digitized material, you've seen that it's very clear, crisp, all of those things. So one of our digital project specialists shot that material on one of these camera setups, and we have 3 throughout our digital lab. After that, the images are checked against the originals. So a digital lab member will sit with the original boxes. They will look at the pictures they took. They will make sure that everything looks the way that it looks in real life. And then they will do an upload into what's called a digital assets management system, a DAM. They then go through the images again before they actually publish them to make sure that everything went smoothly with the ingest. That's what it's called, that upload. It's called an ingest. It often does not go smoothly with the ingest, but that is why they do that other check at every stage. They do a check against the originals. And then the images are moved from the DAM to Archivespace, to that public-facing element of the digital assets management system that we're going to go over. And then again, before we actually hit publish, they will do quality control. Because again, every single time you move this amount of digital material from one place to another, things can go wrong. So every step along the way, they are going back and they are making sure that everything looks how it's supposed to look. And then once everything is ingested, we have 3 different elements of our long-term storage for digitized material. It's preserved in the DAM itself. We have a separate cloud. Everything is copied over into this cloud. And they're also on a local server that's here at the center that is backed up on physical tape arrays daily and taken off-site. That's sort of the minimum level of long-term preservation that we feel is responsible to be able to maintain these really precious digitized collections ostensibly in perpetuity, which is our job. So why am I telling you all this? Before we even get into how to access this material, number 1, I think it's cool. Number 2, all of this labor is pretty invisible, and I think that my colleagues in the digital lab deserve a lot of credit for this very intensive and tricky and kind of fragile process. I mean, if you think about the kinds of materials that they're working with, they're often very damaged, they're very old, they can be in poor condition. And it really does take a lot of skill in sort of archival handling and on the tech side to be able to pull this off. But number 3, people will often ask why things aren't digitized, or why this is digitized and why this isn't. And I just want to stress that something being digitized is not a sign that we think that it's more important than one collection that's here or anything like that. We digitize quite a bit, again, for an institution of our size, and also just in the absolute sense, we are digitizing quite a bit of material. But given the size of the YIVO archives in general, it's still a tiny fraction of our collections. And that's not to say that we're not digitizing in order of what we think is most important, or like which writer has the most important historical legacy or anything like that. With the amount of planning and time that this takes, a lot of factors go into digitization. A big one is funding, of course, but there are other sort of less obvious factors. For example, if we're applying for a grant and there are 2 collections that fit the bill, right, that fit the grant guidelines, all other things being equal, we're going to digitize the collection that's in worse shape so that we can have it be accessible without it having to be handled. So I just want everyone to kind of have a sense of what goes into the process. Know that we don't choose what to digitize lightly. There are a lot of outside factors and a lot of scheduling and planning that goes into it. And as a corollary to that, if you ask how to access a collection online and somebody here says, oh, it's not digitized, we can't just go and digitize it. This is why, because it's a very long process that involves a lot of staff members. All right, so we've gone through all of that. How do you actually access digitized material? The vast majority of our digitized holdings and everything that we are going to be digitizing in the future is accessible through a website called Archivespace. A quick refresher, if you've seen any of our other programs or if you've used Archivespace, or a quick intro if this is a new website for you. But this is the website. And again, this is linked in the PDF that my colleagues have been putting in the chat. But this is where our finding aids live. So a finding aid is a full description of an archival collection. And we'll take a look at one in a second. And all of the material is linked through the finding aid. So I'm going to go to YIVO's finding aids here. So just so you all saw, this is the main page. I clicked repositories. I'm going to click on YIVO, and I'm going to look at our collections. And let's take a look at this RG36, the Abraham Moshe Bernstein collection, which has been digitized. So I have this digitized collection. How do I actually see it? To see the digitized objects, you have to be at an item or a folder level. So I'm not seeing any digitized objects here. If I click Series 1, I'm not seeing any digitized objects. I have to actually go to the folder or to the object, and then this big red View Online button is what I click, and this is what I get. So it's folder by folder. And you can see, I'm going to make it a little bigger. This is something that was digitized by our digital lab, went through that whole process. Now, through Archivespace, we can access this item. A few things to note here. Number one, this could look different depending on what browser you're using, a few other factors if you're on mobile versus your computer, but somewhere on your screen, you should see this or this. Those are both the download button. So you can download any of this material and sort of organize it with however else you're organizing your research material. This or this is a share button. So that just gives you the link to copy if you're organizing anything sort of in any sort of document. And you can also view different folders, different pages. If you go here, I sometimes find this easier to click through just because you can see more pages at a time. Or also if you're looking at a citation that has a certain page, you can go down here and just go straight to that page. As ever, this is the real theme of these workshops. I highly recommend clicking around and seeing what happens. But that is the basic how to get to digitized material from the finding aid. So you don't always get to digitized material from the finding aid, right? You kind of have to know what you're looking for, know what the finding aid is called, get to the finding aid. That's not always how people find material. And I'm going to plug the practical introduction to research at YIVO if you are interested in sort of how to do really comprehensive catalog searches. But let's say I wanted this score. And I knew what it was called, so I just put it into Archivespace. I have 3 results here. And these results are all actually going to lead me to the same thing, but in different ways. So I'm going to open all of these tabs so we can take a look at what is different from each of these results. Let me X out of that. So this first result takes me right back to the finding aid, right? It's not taking me directly to the object, that's taking me directly to the place where it is in the finding aid. If you get one of these results, it means that the phrase that you searched is in the finding aid, but you have to now search within the collection to find it. So I'm going to search in this little sidebar on this collection, and this is what I'm looking for. This result is the same as our second tab. If I clicked on that tab, it took me right to the file, right to the object level description in Archivespace. And then this result took me to the digital object in Archivespace. This can be a little confusing. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but essentially what we're looking at right now that says digital record here in Archivespace is linked to the finding aid here. So these are it's the same PDF, it's the same everything, but it's sort of filed differently in the software. This is where the digital object here is linked to the finding aid, if that makes sense. Let me check the chat real quick. Okay, everyone looks good with that. A few things to note here. However you end up in finding an object, sometimes you can even, somebody might send you a link directly to this. The way to cite and the way to sort of request it remains the way that you would anything in paper, right? If you see archival citations, they should give you a box or a series or a folder number at a minimum. You still want to do that. I have been getting people citing things or requesting things using this identifier, or sometimes pulling this number from the URL. And that is not going to be replicable for the average person. So if you're citing, they're in different places depending on sort of how you're looking at the object. But you can see here, if we're on the digital record page, it's linked. You can see what records it's linked to. So I can go to this and I can go back to this page and I can say, oh, okay, this is in RG36 series 1, right? And if you are looking at the actual object, again, the level of description varies, but somewhere in this right sidebar under descriptive information, you should have enough information to at least go find it again. So we have RG, we have box 1, folder 1, object 1 to 4. That's what you would use to cite, not like this Archivespace identifier or this file number. Not helpful, unfortunately, to anyone else. Okay, that is Archivespace. That's kind of a crash course. I do find it fairly intuitive, and I think a lot of people, once they know that it exists and they start to get the hang of it, hopefully find it intuitive as well. And everything that's digitized from here on out is going through here. So by and large, Archivespace is your one-stop shop for YIVO's digitized holdings. However, that said, we do have a number of important and very helpful projects that updated Archivespace. And these websites are built in such a way that it's not so easy to just move everything into Archivespace. So at least for the time being, you have to go through these websites separately. So let's go through those so that you all know that these exist. And all of these links are in the PDF that Julia is putting in the chat. So this first website is called the Ruth Rubin Legacy, Archive of Yiddish Folk Songs. If you're not familiar, Ruth Rubin was a very important Yiddish folklorist, musicologist, and we have many of her recordings digitized. We have field recordings from her field work. We have lectures. We have some documents and videos, all digitized. And these, again, are not integrated into Archivespace. So if you are interested in this material, you would have to go directly through this website. So this, if anyone is familiar with the Edward Blank YIVO Vilna Online Collections project, we recently completed digitizing all of our pre-war holdings. It was a 7-year project. This is now the most comprehensive archive on pre-war Jewish life in the world, pre-war Eastern European Jewish life in the world. And this is actually linked to Archivespace, but this portal allows you to just search the Vilna Collection project. So if we look for Warsaw, for example, all of these results are only materials that were digitized through Vilna, meaning that they're pre-war part of that project. So it helps you cut down on a lot of extraneous information that you would find if you were just searching in the normal portal. People of 1,000 Towns is another great website. As a note, you do have to make an account to access it, but it's free. It says when you make an account that you have to reset it after 7 days. I have never found that to be the case. But this is an archive of photographs of pre-war Jewish life. So very helpful website. Whenever people ask for photos of whatever town pre-war, I just send them here. They're basically all digitized through here, anything that we have that's pre-war. YIVO Digital Archive on Jewish Life in Poland is a great website. I know people are still using this a lot. You can look through all sorts of photos and audio and video. There are interactive maps. And what is nice about this website is some of it is replicated in Archivespace. Some of it is from the Vilna project, or what is we now call the Vilna project. Some of it is digitized and unique on this website. But this is great because it's sort of curated, right? It's curated and you've got some extra commentary and background on the materials. If you're just searching through Archivespace, looking for Polish Jewish history, you don't have as much background and support. So this is a great entry point if you're just starting to do your research and it is related to Jewish life in Poland. This is the Milstein Family Jewish Communal Archive project. Not everything is digitized, but this was a project to catalog and sort of put in one place the archives of these very important Jewish communal organizations. So we have the 92nd Street Y, the Educational Alliance, FEGS, which was an employment service, NYANA, the New York Association for New Americans, Surprise Lake Camp, which was a Jewish summer camp, and YIVO. So all of these organizations' archives were processed through this project or were received through this project. They're in various states of processing, but a good amount of stuff was digitized. And this is not the easiest website to search through. The search is a little wonky, but it is helpful to have this kind of material available. And again, not the entire collection for any of these were digitized. These are sort of selected photographs and documents, but still better than nothing. This is technically library material, but I think very interesting to anyone who's doing archival research in Yiddish theater, even though it is from the library. And we will wait for it to load slowly. We will maybe not wait, and we'll just talk about it. There we go. So this is 617 Yiddish plays that are digitized and available through the Internet Archive. So if you are, again, not technically an archives project, but I know it's of interest to a number of people that I work with who are doing archival research. So that's a great resource for anyone who's interested in Yiddish theater and can't access YIVO's holdings in person. So those, I believe, yes, that is all of our, that is all of our websites that are not integrated into Archivespace. You can find links to all of those websites directly in the PDF. You can also find a link to our digital assets LibGuide, which I'm going to navigate to right here. Again, you have the direct link. I'm just doing this so I can show you. But you can go to this digital assets LibGuide. It's regularly updated with new collections, new developments, and access. And you can get to all of those links from there as well. And one thing that I did not show you that I should have done when I was talking about Archivespace is this. So as you might have seen in Archivespace, I'm going to go back to the list of YIVO collections. So this is the list that we first looked at in the beginning of this program. If you scroll through, you'll see you can't actually tell which collections have digitized material, which is something that I know the general Archivespace user community, which is virtually every archive in the US at a minimum, has brought to Archivespace. And I'm hoping that in future updates to Archivespace, they have some sort of way to indicate if things are digitized. But for now, they do not. If you're in Archivespace, you just have to click and see if what you're looking for has a digital object record. Like you can see this doesn't. So this is a little circuitous, but what you can do, if you go to the YIVO website and you go to research, YIVO Archives and Library Collections, at the bottom of this page, we keep this list of digitized archival collections. So you can stay in this page and you can scroll. But what I prefer to do is go, you can see at the very bottom, I'll zoom in a little. The very bottom, there's this view larger version button. So I click that and it takes me to this list of digitized collections. So you can scroll through, you have the titles, you have the RGs, you have the languages, and if you click, you'll be able to read the entire collection description and get the link to Archivespace to be able to actually access the material. And you can also, if you're in this full view, you can filter for certain things. I think really the main thing you would be able to filter by that is useful is language. But let's say you're only looking, let's say you can only read English, right? So you only want things that have at least some English material. So I'm going to go to filter, I'm going to go to add condition. I'm going to go to this first column that says make sure that it says languages. And then at select an option, I'm going to toggle English on. And now my personal view, I have filtered and I can scroll through only collections that contain at least some English. So again, a little backwards, but until Archivespace, when and if Archivespace updates to be able to indicate in the system what's digitized, we're going to keep maintaining this so that as we digitize collections, people can find them all in one place easily and scroll through. Okay, so that is basically everything you need to know to just generally access digitized material. All of this you can access from home with, as long as you have internet, go to the library, access it wherever you want to go. But we do realize that for people who can't get to New York, that means that a very large proportion of our holdings are still not accessible. So we do have two services. One is what we call reference photographs. So you can fill out a form that is in the PDF. And I, or somebody else who works in the archives, will take the material that you want, that you are interested in, and we take photographs of it with this document camera. These are they're legible, but they're not high res, they're not super professional or anything. This is just what enables us to get through the volume of what people want for little or no money. So you can fill out a form if you've found a collection that's not digitized and is not slated to be digitized in the foreseeable future. You can fill out that form, request whatever folders you want, and you can get reference photographs that we take with this camera. We offer an hour of reference photography free of charge. That's usually about 300 to 400 pages of material. So that'll get you pretty far. So we'll just email you a PDF of all of those photographs. Further photography is available at a rate of $35 an hour. So again, every hour is, depending on the collection, probably around 300 pages of material. So you can probably get pretty far with our free services or our lower cost services, as long as you don't need high resolution images. And the other way to get remote access to material is high resolution reproductions. We have a photo archivist who handles all of those requests. The email is in the PDF, and those do have a reproduction fee of $40 and a use fee of $40. So, you know, we do as much as we can free of charge, but, you know, until however many decades it takes to get everything digitized, if that's even possible, we do have to somewhat, you know, limit services. We can't photograph, you know, entire 20-box collections for free and email them. And one thing that I want to talk about here that is a little confusing and has come up fairly often is copyright, reproductions, things like that. I don't want to get too into the weeds, and if you have questions, always feel free to email. But as a just general note, everything that we put online, copyright still applies, right? Legally, us putting something online is not any different than us giving it to you in a reading room in person and you taking pictures of it with your phone, right? There's some confusion that if we provide access to something either on the website or we send reference photographs, that we've given permission for it to be used, but all of the same copyright rules apply. And I think this is just a little more confusing because it used to be that you could really only get these images of the archival material through the photo archivist. So you kind of had no choice but to hear about copyright and reproductions, right? But now you can go and get, you know, millions of pages are just available online and you can go and have them on your computer. I will say, you know, the majority of people that I work with, any sort of thing that they're working on, if it's a school project, anything like that, a presentation, everything falls under fair use, right? So you can use the images freely for educational purposes, for nonprofit purposes. You know, we do ask that you credit YIVO if you found stuff in the YIVO archives, but, you know, we realize we can't control that. But just because something is online does not mean that copyright no longer applies. So hopefully you have a good sense of if you're publishing something, if you're, you know, working with a press on a book that you're selling, anything like that, all of those things still apply. You know, you don't need to, YIVO has separate reproduction and use fees. So if it's something that's already been digitized, you wouldn't need to pay the use fee, but you would still need to go through the photo archives and fill out the reproduction form and pay that $40 use fee, even if it's online, you know, free to use. Okay. As ever, this is the second thing I always say. The first is click around. The second is if you have questions, you can always email us at reference@yivo.org, or you can email me directly if you prefer, for whatever reason. We'll keep those emails up. And now we have plenty of time for questions. The emails are actually in the PDF. So I'm going to stop sharing. And hopefully we have time to get to everybody's questions.
All right, thanks so far. If anyone who's watching has a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A function, likely at the bottom of your Zoom screen or Zoom app on your phone. We'll get started. There's a couple questions about OCR. Can you tell us what OCR stands for and whether or not the texts that are being digitized are also being OCR'd?
Yes, so OCR is optical character recognition. It's a technology where you essentially have a computer read text. So, you know, if I had a scan of something that was typewritten, I could put that into a PDF program and I could have that program spit out what the text actually says in a way that is, you know, it's searchable, I could highlight it, right? If I just took I just took this page and I took a scan of it, the computer doesn't know that there's text on it, right? It's just a picture functionally. So OCR is a program that tries and figures out what the text is in that picture. And we do not use it for a few reasons. One is that OCR is not that good. I mean, if we are talking about typed English text, it's still a fair investment of labor to actually go through and correct the errors. But OCR functionality for a lot of the materials that we're using, which are in non-Latin alphabets, they are in non-standardized dialects, they are, you know, possibly hundreds of years old. OCR is just not at a functional level where that's going to be useful for us. And even if it was, we would still not be putting full transcripts of texts sort of searchable. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here as an archive is make it so that you get good search results, right? So when you're searching in Archivespace or in the library catalog, it's actually only pulling results from certain fields. It's not pulling results from every single little bit of description that we have available for the object, because we only want you to get relevant results. If, you know, say we were OCRing everything and that was all searchable in the catalog, phrases like New York, right? Every single, you would be getting a lot of noise, and we want to prevent that. I will say we have a lot of researchers, a lot of professors who are doing digital humanities programs, and they say, you know, can I take this thing that you have digitized and OCR it and do whatever my project is? And we say, you know, of course, it's free to use, do what you want with it. But we are not OCRing here at YIVO, but you are welcome to, you know, take what we make available, and if OCR is helpful for your purposes, you know, you can run it through a number of free programs and see what happens.
All right, another question we have. How would I go about finding a particular Yiddish song?
Ooh, okay. So this is where it gets to be a bit of an art. And I don't know if you have seen our previous programs, but that really gets more into the weeds of that. Can you tell me the song?
Looks like that was just the extent of the question. So
Okay.
maybe you can imagine one or.
All right, so I'm gonna take you through my process, and the part of my process that is not just asking the sound archivists down the hall. So let's say we want to find a manuscript of by Mir Shame, right? That's YIVO transliteration. Like, this does not seem right. We have to have something on this. Let me pick one that has a little less of a transliteration problem. Still nothing. Okay, great. This is the real process. People ask me for things and I don't find them right away. So I'm going to check. This is the catalog. This is the general catalog. So it's not just archival material, it's also library material. So I always just run it through search.cjh.org first. And then I go to archives.cjh.org and see what happens. Okay, great. We have one hit that did not show up in the catalog. So here we can see we have a version of Tumbala Laika published in 1956. Great. And the other thing that I do that requires a fair amount of knowledge of the collections is I go to the music collections and I look at the finding aids. So RG112 is our sheet music collection. And this is something we've been working for several years to integrate all of our finding aids into Archivespace. And we've actually made a tremendous amount of progress, but they're not still in Archivespace. Not all of them. So this is one that has not been integrated because, as you can see, it is extremely long. So what I would do is I would go to sheet music and I would actually read through this entire thing and see if we had Tumala Laika anywhere in RG112, which I have to imagine that we do. And I would say, whoever asked that question, if you do those 3 steps, if you check the catalog, if you check archives.cgh.org, and if you check this finding aid, that'll get you pretty far. But also you can just email me and I'll do all that.
All right, another question. This person says, good afternoon, and thank you for this informative session, which I very much agree has been very informative so far. They want to know, are there any digitized testimonies of Treblinka survivors in these collections? Where and how can these be accessed?
Probably. Let me see if this is up yet. I should say a very exciting development in YIVO Archives history that's happening right now is we are digitizing all of our microfilm. So a big collection that I'm not sure if it's up yet. Okay, it's not up, but we have it digitized and the digital lab is processing it. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's record group 104, eyewitness accounts of Holocaust testimonies. So in the coming months, if you go to Archivespace and you search for record group 104, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of eyewitness testimonies. For now, email me and I can see how many we have from Treblinka and pull them from our digital assets server, which is kind of where things live until we actually get them online and into all of those, long-term preservation. But that is the long answer. Yes, we do have digitized things. And I will say, our other partners at the Center for Jewish History also have a lot of material digitized. So I'm just going to look real quick. Okay, we actually have something digitized that I'm going to throw in the chat. So yes, the answer is yes.
All right, another question. Someone wants to know, is it correct that Archivespace is your DAM? Or is there another system that Archivespace is interfacing with behind the scenes to manage your digital content? Maybe you can remind us what DAM stands for.
Yes, DAM stands for Digital Assets Management System. Archivespace is not the DAM. Archivespace is like the public portal to the DAM. We use a DAM, and I'll put it in the chat. We use a program called Rosetta. So if you are, asking for your own purposes, that's what we are using, and we are happy to answer questions about that if this is something that you're doing in your own work. And also our cloud storage, our second of 3 backups, we use Amazon Glacier.
Another question, someone was curious about the Thousand Towns archive. They wanted to know if they're indexed by town or if you need to scroll through the images.
They are indexed by town. Now let me log in so I can show you how I always search. So I have logged in. Again, you do have to make an account. You can just look at the index. So it's not just city and town, it's also country to the extent that they have proper names. If you're interested in a particular photographer, you can scroll through the indices. I always just go to search. And here where it says city town name, there's this tiny little browse. So I click that and then you can browse by town. And that's always very helpful because a lot of these town names are kind of inconsistent. And again, this is, we talk about this in previous workshops, how to sort of find different town names and search them all. But sometimes people will email with a town. I always just go here because the spellings are more often than not inconsistent.
So also on the topic of the special project website, someone wants to know the Jewish life in Poland, what is considered to be Poland? So you don't have to answer that question right now. That's a big question. But if someone has a big question kind of like that, that's not maybe necessarily a very specific research question that they can be answered with a specific, document, where should they go from YIVO to find out more general information?
So I would say for those kinds of questions, like click around the website. I'm going to put a link to the chat that addresses the question of what's on this website, which is directly speaking to this concern, right? In general, we have linked throughout our website a lot of other resources on Jewish history, Jewish life. I always say if you're just at a really beginning point, maybe you're writing a term paper or something like that, and you're exploring something for the first time, I do really like the YIVO Encyclopedia, not to plug my own employer, but it is a great resource. And those kinds of websites will often link to other materials. I also like yiddishsources.com that I will put in the chat. And all of these things kind of link to each other in a real circular way. So again, click around. You will probably find some good resources.
That makes sense. I can imagine some people listening might have kind of big ideas, big questions about that they want to answer, maybe spending some time on the YIVO Encyclopedia or in some of these special project sites, or kind of getting a sense of what's in the archives might help people who are watching maybe kind of help to narrow down their question into something that might actually be able to be answerable by actual archival materials. And then you don't have to let go of your big question. There's hopefully other narrow questions you can find from that big question too. So we're all about asking questions here. Another question from the audience, someone wants to know if there are electronic Yiddish novels that are accessible through the YIVO archives, and if not, where are some places people might be able to find those online?
So we don't have a great library digitization going on right now. All of our work is in the archives. So things like novels that are published are not so accessible through YIVO, but if you're familiar with the Yiddish Book Center, they have an incredibly extensive digital Yiddish library. That is actually are beta testing or did beta test. And they're still beta testing their OCR, but you can make an account and search the entire text by OCR. So I put that link in the chat. Thousands of Yiddish books, including novels, fully available free through the Yiddish Book Center online.
So we have only a few more minutes. So if anyone in the chat has a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A function. We'll try and get to it. A question we also have from the audience is someone has a question about conservation. So at the beginning of this talk, you talked about how sometimes YIVO will prioritize, say, the more vulnerable materials to make sure those get digitized first. Can you talk a little bit more about the kind of concerns for conservation that go into the digitization process?
Sure. So we also have an in-house conservation lab, which is again fairly uncommon. We have 3 full-time staff conservators. There are 2 things that they deal with a lot. One is paper that's just too fragile to really handle. So they'll repair it. There are certain kinds of essentially tapes or certain kinds of like sticky paper that they iron on to collections, all very controlled and carefully, so that if things are split apart, if something is really too fragile to be handled, they'll just reinforce the entire back of it. The other thing is just dirt, right? A lot of times collections are just you can't actually read what's on them because they're covered in dirt. So there are special brushes, things like that. So I'll clean everything up, make it so that it can be handled by non-conservation professionals. And they'll also deal with the things that come up less, but are unfortunately still part of the archive. Things like mold comes up. We put everything in acid-free sleeves, which is why it's so expensive to run an archive. One of the reasons it's so expensive to run an archive. And the other thing that the conservation team does is also just control the environment. Our stacks are controlled light, temperature, humidity levels, special cleaning so that little silver bugs and all sorts of things that can destroy paper don't get into them. So they also make sure that that is happening in the environment.
It's interesting to think about all the different ways we need to preserve or protect the physical items. And then as we digitize things, then there's a whole question about, well, how do you keep, digitized things available? Right now, these links are all active and hopefully will be for, the foreseeable future. But what happens in 10 years when there's some sort of invention that people use that isn't even computers anymore? We don't even know yet. So it's a really exciting project, I think, for our archivists to get to think about all these different questions of the future when they're obviously dealing with materials from the past. So thank you so much, Hallel, for being with us today. There's a few more questions we didn't get to in the chat, a lot of them kind of specific questions about, does YIVO has information about one particular person or one particular town? As Hallel said, you can email reference@yivo.org. And one of our archivists will try and help point you in the right direction. Feel free to rewatch this event yourself and see if you can yourself through some of these websites, try and find information, but we're always happy to help. Thank you so much. We're all so glad to have you here and we look forward to seeing you at the next YIVO program.
Thank you.